Today's podcast is brought to you by newspapers.com, the ultimate destination for exploring the mysteries of the past. Now, most of my own work uncovering the world of Joe Petrosino and his Italian squad, their stories, the characters they battled, the dark history of the Black Hand, it's all been pieced together thanks to newspapers.com. And I have to tell you, they do what I love most, bringing the past back to life and ensuring it doesn't fade away in the crumbling pages of old newspapers. So whether you're into famous crimes or forgotten cases, newspapers.com gives you a front row seat to over 300 years of history. With more than 1 billion pages of newspapers from the U.S. and beyond, you can search it all in seconds. It's a goldmine of eyewitness accounts, crime scene photos, news reports, and more. And for our listeners, newspapers.com has a special offer. Use the code Italian Squad for an exclusive 20% discount on your subscription. That's promo code Italian Squad at newspapers.com. In Calvary Cemetery in Queens, New York, among countless graves, lies an unmarked plot that holds a remarkable story. It's the resting place of Raffaele Cascone, a man once known as the King of Mulberry Street.
He was a show-off. He was a bragger. He always had a wad of cash in his pocket. He had a diamond stick pin in his tie. He liked to have a lot of people listening to his stories. His reputation was that he knew what he was doing with a gun and a knife, and that he always had those two things on him.
I'm Anthony Cicchino, and this is The King of Mulberry Street on True Crimes of Black Hand, New York. Joining me today is a very special guest with a deeply personal connection to the incredible story of Raffaele Cascone, the King of Mulberry Street. Joanne Sperando is Cascone's great-granddaughter, and she's here to share her fascinating journey discovering her notorious ancestor. Joanne, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Anthony.
I'm so excited to dive into this with you. And we've been talking for a couple of months, and I was so impressed and intrigued by all of the research, everything that you've done. And I hope by the end of us talking here, because I think one of the things that struck me was you seem to have been struggling with this person in your family who you didn't even know. And sort of at the end of this, I want to ask you about that. But that's also just sort of what intrigued me. But let's start off with maybe tell us a little bit about how long you've been looking into your great-grandfather. And at its base, what story have you discovered?
For the past 15 years, I have been intrigued by the story of my great-grandfather, Raffaele Cascone. And I have been working on a book about his journey to America and how that evolved with my family. This is the story of one complicated immigrant's journey, looking for success and prosperity, but finding that he was willing to do lots of things to achieve money, fame, and power.
Money, fame, and power. That's what he wanted?
I really believe that.
Yeah.
In that order, too.
Cascone's immigration story is far from typical.
That's right.
I mean, we're talking about brothels and high-stakes gambling, murder charges, death row.
Yes.
A woman named Maria, the beautiful tambourine girl who was out for vengeance. I mean, this is an incredible story, and we're going to get into all of that. But first, just tell us what drew you to research your great-grandfather?
My dad actually started me down this path when I was a very young kid. We knew that I had a notorious great-grandfather. My father was very curious about his grandfather and actually started out doing research first. And because his mother did not speak about the father a lot. He was from a village outside of Naples called Lauro, and he was born in 1867. He got married at 23 to a local girl. They were farm workers. They were laborers, I would say. And I do know that my great-grandfather was arrested multiple times in Italy by local police for weapons possession and some violence, beating someone up. He didn't kill anyone as far as I know, but he eventually left for America in 1894 and arrived in New York at 27 years old, leaving behind his wife and his daughter. My grandmother, Maria Cascone, and trying to make his way and find success here in America. After having a push cart on the street, and I think he dabbled in a cigar store. He did manage to open up a restaurant on Main Street in Brooklyn, in the Dumbo area.
What would now be called Dumbo?
Now be called Dumbo. I don't know what it was called back then, but I do know that it was a successful place that was always busy. It's a restaurant with a little side business of gambling, cards. So there's obviously more was being served than frittatas.
What year is this when that restaurant opens?
I believe it was 1897, 1898 that he started that restaurant in Brooklyn.
If I was walking past your great-grandfather's restaurant in 1899 in Brooklyn, and he then all of a sudden walked out the front door, what would my impression of him be?
You would see an uncharacteristically large man who was about 220 pounds, 5'11". He was rather bombastic. He was a show-off. He was a bragger. He always had a wad of cash in his pocket. He had a diamond stick pin in his tie, which is kind of weird for, Italian immigrants at that time. They were very modest, hardworking people, and so he really stood out, I think. He was a notorious gambler, playing all the Italian card games at his restaurant. He liked to have a lot of people listening to his stories. His reputation was that he knew what he was doing with a gun and a knife, and that he always had those two things on him at all times. But I would say that 1899 in this restaurant in Brooklyn is when the police became aware of him.
So in these early years, was he just like a Brooklyn guy hanging out at his restaurant on Main Street? Or did he ever travel into Manhattan?
The restaurant was not far from the Catherine Street ferry, which ran between Brooklyn and downtown New York. He would journey to New York on a regular basis and sit in on these high-stakes games, hundreds of dollars, which was, tremendous amount of money back then. And he did very well. And after one particular night, this was February of 1899, where he really cleaned up and cleaned out the people he was playing with, they decided to come to Brooklyn the next day and confront him. Because when they started comparing notes, they felt that his luck was not natural.
So he's potentially cheating somehow?
That's what they were accusing him of, I can say.
So I assume that Cascone has no idea what is coming.
No.
Can you take us through what happened?
It was 3:00 in the afternoon, and it was a particularly cold February in New York at that time. He was in his restaurant in Brooklyn, regaling a group of friends, talking about how much money he made the night before and pulling it out and showing it off. And the door swings open, and in walk 5 men. And they walk right over to him.
Yeah.
Words are exchanged, and it was so loud that it actually drew a crowd. People outside kept hearing this shouting argument, and people kind of were peering in, looking at what was going on, and there were patrons in the restaurant. So he was accused. He was accused of cheating at the game, and he was incredibly insulted. And the next thing you know, guns are out, and the shooting starts. They said that the restaurant filled with smoke. There were bullets in the walls. Mirrors were shattered. It was a harsh gunfight. The patrons dove under their tables, trying to hide from this onslaught of lots of guns going off. And the group from New York takes off out the door. And I should also mention that upstairs lived Augusto Siniscalchi and his wife, Maria. They are from very close to where Cascone was from in Lauro, and they knew each other in Italy. Augusto Siniscalchi was armed. He pulled out his gun and chased after them. And police now, 2 patrolling policemen have heard this ruckus. And as they are approaching the restaurant, they see an arm out the window holding a gun. And that was Raffaele shooting after these men. The police enter the restaurant just as Cascone is now trying to run out and chase after the remaining people. And they arrest him immediately. They grab him. But Augusto takes off after these men and he shoots one. Augusto then is starting to be chased now by the police, and he makes the dead run for the Catherine Street ferry, thinking I'll escape to New York. And they actually chased him for quite a while. He was dodging in and out of buildings and doorways, but they managed to grab him before he made it to the ferry. So Cascone and Siniscalchi are arrested and brought to the local police station.
So who are the men who are killed? Do we know?
Yes, their names are Peter Torello and James Lanio. They are young people. Unfortunately, they're also armed. And when they're found, their guns are on them. I believe James's gun was under him. That's who Cascone shot. And he was killed immediately because one of the bullets went into his eye. The other gentleman, he didn't die right away, but he was brought to the local hospital. And he died the next day. So Cascone and Siniscalchi, who are in jail now, were charged with murder.
Is the trial, does it happen relatively?
Well, the shooting was in late February. The trial started in April of that year. So
Okay.
Cascone is put on trial first. They're not tried together. And there's only about 3 or 4 days of testimony. They had tons of witnesses from the restaurant and the neighborhood. They had people testifying that Cascone was a businessman in the neighborhood, and I think they tried to put a positive spin on things. But after 3 or 4 days, it goes to the jury, and they find him innocent. And they talked about that it was a self-defense case, and because it was so quick and so definitive, charges against Siniscalchi were dropped.
Okay.
But something goes on between Raffaele Cascone and Augusto Siniscalchi that is not good. And they end up, at the end of this, they are enemies.
Aha, the plot thickens.
That's right.
This falling out between Cascone and Siniscalchi is going to have ripple effects. I know that. But before we get into all of that, let me just ask you quickly about your grandmother, Maria. You said she was left behind by her father, Raffaele Cascone, when he first came to New York in 1894. Do you know, did they ever see each other again after that?
Well, in 1898, his first wife, my grandmother's mother, died at 25 or 26 years old in Italy. So my grandmother, Maria, is left in Italy, and Cascone's family takes her in. They care for her, and Cascone is sending money back. And she's actually placed in a convent where she learns to read and write, very unusual for that time, turn of the century Italy. And Cascone, to my knowledge, only went back once to visit after his first wife died. My grandmother did mention that the family was kind of afraid of him. He was quite an imposing character.
Really?
Yeah. So needless to say, he has taken a new wife here in America, and her name is Carolina. The 1900 census finds them living in Manhattan on Bayard Street, which is not far from Mulberry Street.
Yeah.
Now he goes into a business at 109 Mulberry Street, a saloon downstairs, and unfortunately a brothel above the saloon. And he is kind of running life the same way. There's gambling, there's prostitution that he is benefiting from. I read some testimony of 2 women who worked there and said that they had to give the money to Cascone's wife, Carolina. And it's disappointing and sad to learn that. You know, we come to find out that they were calling him the king of Mulberry Street. So obviously he's well known. He is a character, and he walks around Mulberry Street like a king. So I think that nickname was well deserved. He was a presence. He was a big presence there.
So he's now on Mulberry Street. It's 1900, and his brother, Domenico, enters the picture
Yeah.
in some way. So what's the story with Domenico?
Domenico is his younger brother, and Cascone paid for his brother's passage because in the records, when your relative comes and you look up those records, it actually says, did somebody pay for your journey? And he said, yes, my brother paid. They say that as big and bombastic as Raffaele was, his brother was the exact opposite. Smaller, quieter, a little skinny guy who does not have any of Cascone's bluster, I would say. They refer to him as his weaker younger brother.
The fact that he pays for his brother's passage here also, I think, speaks to Cascone's success, right? Would you say?
Definitely, yeah.
Okay, so Domenico is here. He gets a job across the street.
Yes.
Are these friends of Cascone?
Well, there are these two other families. And I mentioned Augusto and Maria Siniscalchi, husband and wife.
Right. And as a reminder to our listeners, because with all these names, they can get kind of confusing.
That's right.
Augusto and Maria Siniscalchi used to live above Cascone's restaurant in Brooklyn. That was the one that was attacked in 1899 after the card game. Then Cascone and Siniscalchi, for some reason, become enemies.
Yes. Now, the Siniscalchis are related to another family, and that name is Santaniello. And the Santaniello brothers own a grocery store very close to 109 Mulberry. It's on Mulberry Street, and they are running this grocery store. And Cascone manages to get his brother a job there. Now, the Santaniellos and the Siniscalchis, they're cousins. And like I said before, that Cascone had bad blood between him and Augusto. Augusto was not involved in the grocery store. So Cascone manages to get Domenico a job in that store. But I think it's kind of seen immediately what kind of a, like a weak character. He's a kind of a young man who is trying to find his way, but they don't like him.
Can he be pushed around, maybe?
I think, yes. I think he was like a victim of bullying back then.
So why is this a problem?
It becomes a problem in 1903 because there's a confrontation between Domenico and a member of the Siniscalchi clan and a member of the Santaniello clan. And they cross paths in Mulberry Street. They have some kind of a confrontation. They tell him to tell his brother, Raffaele, stay away from my sweetheart. Tell your brother, stay away. And they slap him around. He talks about being slapped in the face by these men and then kind of, laughed at and thrown away. I also think it's interesting that instead of confronting Big Raffaele, they called him Big Raff in Mulberry Street, the king of Mulberry Street, that they sent a message to him kind of subtly through his weak little brother.
If Domenico had left it at that, this story might have been a lot different.
Very different, yeah.
So what does he do?
Well, he doesn't keep it to himself. He runs home to 109 Mulberry Street, and he rushes in the saloon and tells Raffaele, I just got slapped in the face. He was crying. That's how it was described, that he was crying with the shame of being abused. And I would have thought that Raffaele would have had an immediate instinct to defend his brother and do something in retaliation. Instead, he kind of laughs at his brother too and says, don't worry about it. I'm going to take care of it. And I've got a nice shotgun upstairs that will handle this.
The two men that slapped Domenico.
Yes.
I'm really interested in these names. Giacomo Santaniello and what is this? Tirigi Siniscalchi?
Yeah.
What a name.
Tirigi. I don't know if I'm saying it
Tirigi,
correctly.
yeah. Mm-hmm.
I've never heard that name before.
Yeah, neither have I until I read that.
Yeah.
It's a very interesting name.
Yeah.
I keep thinking to myself, if these were Irish gangsters, no one would have a hard time pronouncing their names.
Oh boy.
The press probably would have spelled everything correctly.
Oh, you should see the butchering of Italian names, first and last names.
So Torrigi, Siniscalchi, Giacomo Santaniello. A couple days later, they come into the restaurant, or what happens?
They are certainly members of the neighborhood. And I believe at the time everyone lives within a stone's throw of Mulberry Street, if not on Mulberry Street. So several days later, the two people that slapped Domenico are strolling around Cascone's saloon at 109 Mulberry. Shots ring out, and Siniscalchi was shot in the jaw and was missing a large part of his jaw, and he couldn't speak. Santaniello is also very, very injured. There was blood everywhere, and several people in the crowd were also injured from the shot.
Did people see who did it?
That is, I would say, a point of contention. But Cascone and Domenico were absolutely seen there. There's a accusation that Cascone did the shooting and he gave the gun to his brother and said, go across the street. And Domenico was never seen after that.
So he disappears after the shooting?
After the shooting.
He's just gone. He
is
disappears.
gone.
Yeah.
Raffaele returns to his saloon at 109 Mulberry, and he is in there drinking when the police come in and arrest him, and they bring him to the hospital. Siniscalchi's still alive. He couldn't speak, though. So the police officer is writing on an envelope, and I actually have a copy of that, too. And he is questioning the victim. Who shot you? Did you see who shot you? Was it this guy? Was it someone else?
But the thing was that his jaw was blown off and he couldn't speak.
At all.
This encounter in the hospital with the police officer is still used as one of the main pieces of evidence against Cascone, right?
Yes.
Do you know what Raphael's what his reaction is to that? Or
it's funny. The police officer who had him there said that he shrugged. He kept shrugging, like, I didn't, as an innocent, you think an innocent man might do.
Yeah.
He is nonchalant, I will say.
Okay.
He's nonchalant.
So he's not really reacting to it.
No, not at all.
Okay, so the shooting was June 9th, 1903.
Yes. And he was indicted on July 24th for murder in the first degree.
For both of them.
Well, Domenico was indicted as well, but he is nowhere to be found.
Right.
He is nowhere to be found. And I would suspect that he went back to Italy. That would be my guess.
Okay.
But I don't know for sure.
Joanne, this is the perfect spot to end. But in our next episode, Raphael's trial begins, and the stakes are higher than ever.
Yes. With
Domenico gone and no one to back him up, Cascone faces a courtroom ready to make him pay. But the truth behind that fateful shooting is far from clear. Join us next time as we explore the accusations, the testimonies, and the hidden motives that will decide Raphael's fate. Plus, the surprising support of two famous millionaire murderers who throw their influence and money his way. That's on the next episode of True Crimes of Blackhand, New York. See you then.